This is the story of a mystery so dark, it almost feels impossible. Ordinary men Daniel Mercer, Michael Turner, and Thomas Hale vanished without leaving a trace. Their apartments left locked, their cars abandoned, their computers erased. Neighbors recalled the same chilling detail each time: a black van, parked in the shadows, waiting. Investigators called it the work of the Eraser, a figure capable of removing someone from the face of the earth without a single mistake. Before we dive into this disturbing case, make sure you support this channel by subscribing and staying active. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light, stories that still demand answers. Hit that subscribe button, stay connected, and let's begin unraveling one of the most haunting disappearances you've never heard of. On a cold November morning in 2004, 32-year-old accountant Daniel Mercer failed to show up at the downtown office where he had worked for nearly a decade. He wasn't the kind of man to run late, let alone miss a full day without calling. His desk remained untouched, a half-empty coffee mug from the night before sitting exactly where he had left it. Colleagues assumed at first that he was sick or had car trouble, but as the hours stretched on, unease began to spread. Daniel's absence felt unnatural. By evening, his boss tried reaching him, only to find his phone silent and unresponsive. The next day, when no one could reach him, his sister contacted the police. From that moment, Daniel Mercer's name became tied to one of the strangest disappearances the city had ever seen. When officers entered his apartment, they found it immaculate, almost staged. Nothing was broken, no furniture disturbed. His wallet, car keys, and coat were neatly placed on the kitchen counter, as if he had planned to return within minutes. His car sat untouched in the parking lot, locked and undisturbed. The front door showed no signs of tampering, and yet, Daniel was gone. Investigators quickly ruled out burglary, since not a single valuable item had been taken. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong, and there were no signs of a struggle. It was as though Daniel had simply stepped out of his life and dissolved into thin air. The first 48 hours are often the most critical in missing person cases, but Daniel's trail was ice cold from the start. No surveillance cameras in the area captured him leaving. Neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything unusual that night. There were no phone calls, no emails, no sudden withdrawals from his bank account. His routine life had stopped abruptly, without leaving even the faintest clue. Friends described him as steady, cautious, the kind of person who planned every detail. He wasn't reckless, wasn't the type to vanish voluntarily. That certainty made the case all the more unsettling. The only abnormal detail uncovered in those early days was the quiet erasure of Daniel's digital life. His home computer, found sitting on his desk, had been wiped clean. Forensic experts confirmed that someone had deliberately removed the contents using professional methods, far beyond what an average accountant would know. Detectives managed to recover a few fragments, hinting at searches for remote properties, but nothing substantial enough to follow. The erased hard drive raised more questions than answered. The week, suspicion had shifted from a missing person to something darker. To those who knew him, Daniel Mercer had not simply walked away, he had been erased. Detectives pressed deeper into Daniel Mercer's life, hoping to uncover some overlooked detail that might explain his disappearance. They interviewed co-workers, family members, and even casual acquaintances, but no one could provide a meaningful lead. His finances remained untouched, his credit cards dormant, and his phone records revealed nothing more than routine calls to his office and his sister in the days leading up to November 9th. It was as if his life had been frozen in place. At the exact moment he vanished, with no movement on his accounts, Authorities were left puzzled. If Daniel had left voluntarily, why leave behind his money, car, and every resource he would need to survive? If he had been taken, why was there not a single trace of a struggle? Attention turned toward his erased computer, the only sign of deliberate interference. The fragments retrieved hinted at an interest in secluded properties far from the city, particularly areas where records were notoriously outdated and transactions difficult to trace. This discovery unsettled investigators. Had Daniel been lured into some kind of scheme involving remote land, or had someone planted those traces to mislead the search? Without a clearer picture, the computer only deepened the mystery. Then came a subtle but disturbing detail that gave the case its first faint pulse. Several neighbors recalled noticing a black van parked near Daniel's apartment building during the week before he disappeared. No one paid much attention at the time, but in hindsight, the memory stuck. It wasn't a van belonging to any resident, and its presence seemed unusual in a small, quiet complex where strangers were easily noticed. Detectives scoured traffic cameras in the area, but somehow the vehicle never appeared on official footage. Either it had been cleverly concealed, or its plates had been altered to avoid detection. The black van quickly became the most ominous piece of the puzzle. Police followed every lead they could muster. They checked rental records for vans, canvassed nearby businesses, and even contacted delivery companies, but none connected back to Daniel's case. The deeper they dug, the more it felt like they were chasing a shadow. Every potential breakthrough dissolved into nothing. Even the neighbors' recollections varied in detail. Some swore it was parked for hours at a time, others claimed it appeared only at night. What united them all, however, was the eerie feeling that the vehicle didn't belong, as though it were waiting for something or someone. Weeks had passed with no progress. Frustration set in. Detectives had only fragments: a vanished man, a wiped computer, and a mysterious van that slipped through every crack in the system. These were not coincidences. Someone had gone to great lengths to make Daniel Mercer disappear, and whoever it was had done it with chilling precision. 6 months into the investigation, the case of Daniel Mercer seemed destined to fade into the cold files, until a discovery jolted detectives back into action. While reviewing older missing persons cases from surrounding cities, an investigator noticed disturbing similarities to another disappearance 2 years earlier. A man named Michael Turner, 40, had vanished under almost identical circumstances. His apartment was locked from the outside, his car abandoned, and his personal computer had also been wiped clean of all files. Just like Daniel, Michael lived alone, had no history of mental illness or sudden life changes, and had no financial or personal troubles that could explain his disappearance. At the time, his case had gone cold within weeks. Now, in light of Daniel's disappearance, the parallels were impossible to ignore. When detectives placed the two cases side by side, the similarities deepened. Both men were of similar height and build. Both were employed in stable but unremarkable jobs, and both lived solitary, predictable lives. They were men who followed routines, men whose daily patterns could be easily mapped out by anyone watching closely enough. To make matters worse, both cases carried the same ominous detail. In the days before they went missing, neighbors had noticed a black van lingering near their homes. It became clear that this was not coincidence. Someone had been hunting these men, selecting them with precision, and erasing them in ways that left no trace. The idea of a deliberate predator began to take shape. This was not the chaos of random crime or the sudden violence of opportunistic criminals. Whoever was responsible had taken time to study their victims, to learn their patterns, and to strike at the exact moment when no one would notice. This kind of careful orchestration suggested not only patience, but also experience. The precision in removing digital traces, the absence of physical evidence, and the methodical choice of victims painted the picture of someone who knew how to operate undetected data. As detectives connected these cases, the realization grew more chilling. Daniel and Michael might not be the only ones. If this pattern existed, there could be more men whose disappearances had been brushed aside as voluntary vanishings. Investigators began combing through older files, searching for overlooked details that matched the same disturbing blueprint. Each new potential case added to the suspicion that they were dealing with a predator who had mastered the craft of erasure. Police no longer believed they were chasing an ordinary criminal. They were staring at the work of someone who specialized in making people vanish. Someone who had studied vulnerability, exploited solitude, and moved through cities like a shadow. A predator who could stalk, strike, and remove every trace, leaving only silence behind. By 2007, the Mercer case had gone from a baffling local disappearance to part of a chilling pattern that stretched across state lines. Investigators quietly exchanged information with other jurisdictions, and soon the scope of the mystery widened. Scattered across several counties were additional unsolved cases of men who had vanished in eerily similar ways. The details were rarely identical, but the echoes were there. Apartments locked, vehicles left behind, and computers stripped of data. Each time, there was no evidence of violence, no ransom demands, and no trace of a body. The absence itself became the most frightening detail. These men had not just been killed or kidnapped, they had been removed, as if plucked from existence. Within law enforcement circles, the whispers grew louder. A theory developed that whoever was behind these disappearances possessed not only meticulous planning, but also an intimate understanding of investigative procedures. The lack of forensic evidence, the erasure of digital records, and the precision of timing all suggested training. Some speculated the suspect might have been connected to the military, intelligence services, or even law enforcement itself. Others leaned toward the idea of an organized group operating under a single method. What united every theory was the disturbing possibility that someone had found a way to carry out the perfect crime again and again. A retired detective who had studied the cases became obsessed with one particular lead. He believed the missing men were all buried in the Sierra Nevada foothills, a rugged stretch of land notorious for its vastness and lack of oversight. It was the kind of place where abandoned properties and neglected deeds could conceal anything for decades. The detective convinced a small task force to search the area, combing through remote parcels of land where access was limited and records were nearly impossible to track. For weeks, search dogs and excavation teams scoured open fields, old wells, and dried creek beds. The land yielded nothing but silence. No bodies, no evidence, not even a trace that connected the victims to the soil. Despite the fruitless search, the theory refused to die. The idea that there might be a hidden burial ground haunted those who worked the case. The vastness of the wilderness meant that hundreds of potential hiding places still went unchecked. The more time passed, the more hopeless it seemed. Without physical remains, the disappearances remained legally unsolved, and the mysterious figure behind them remained untouchable. For the families, the lack of closure was unbearable. There were no graves to visit, no final answers to bring peace. Instead, they were left with the cruel void, the enduring silence of lives erased without explanation. For investigators, the silence became its own message. a reminder that whoever orchestrated these vanishings was still out there living in the shadows, waiting to strike again. In 2011, the unease that had lingered for years turned into dread when another man vanished under the same haunting circumstances. His name was Thomas Hale, a 35-year-old technician living in a small apartment complex on the edge of the city. Like the others, he lived alone, worked steady hours, and followed a predictable routine. On the night he disappeared, his car remained in its parking spot. His door was locked from the outside, and his computer had been wiped so thoroughly that forensic analysts described it as factory new. Neighbors later came forward to say they had seen a black van parked on the street days before Thomas vanished. The pattern was undeniable. The so-called eraser point. The media had begun connecting the dots, even when authorities hesitated. The story of an unknown figure who could make people vanish without leaving a shred of evidence captured the public's imagination. Newspapers gave the mystery its chilling nickname, and the idea of a predator who could erase not only lives, but entire identities became a national obsession. Yet, despite the growing attention, the investigation stalled under the weight of its own contradictions. For every lead that seemed promising, there was an equally deliberate absence of proof. It was as though the eraser anticipated every investigative step and dismantled it before it began. The FBI eventually stepped in, forming a quiet task force that worked outside the public eye. They reviewed thousands of pages of case files, searched databases for connections, and interviewed families of the missing. Still, there were no suspects, no eyewitnesses who could identify anyone with certainty, and no physical remains to tie the crimes together. The investigation seemed cursed by invisibility. The eraser had left behind locked apartments, erased files, and silent vehicles, but never himself. Years passed with no arrests, no confessions, and no evidence of life or death for the victims. The case took on an almost mythical quality. Some believed the eraser was a former investigator who knew how to hide better than anyone else. Others whispered that it was a group working together, trained to carry out disappearances as if they were operations. A few even argued the victims had chosen to vanish, though the careful staging made that theory nearly impossible to accept. Today, the true number of victims remains unknown. Families still wait for answers that never come, while the eraser's shadow looms in silence. The mystery lingers not because of what was found, but because of what was not. No bodies, no suspects, no mistakes, just lives erased with a precision so complete that it feels less like crime and more like disappearance perfected. Whoever the eraser was, they not only succeeded in making people vanish, but in vanishing themselves, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and the unsettling reminder that some crimes are meant never to be solved.